When is information harmful? And this is a really big question, so I would just like to lay out a bit of a framework for thinking about it. Now, to be clear from the get-go, I'm actually going to argue that it is the salience of information and the way information gets placed in our worldview that is the real culprit for causing harm. It's not the information itself, it's the way that information moves into our lives and our behavior and our trust. All of that is what's going to make information harmful. That's the philosophy here. So I'm going to give 4 different types of information that could be harmful. But before I do that, I want to lay out some principles. The first principle is that bits of information are actually less important than the entire body of information that makes up your worldview. So it could be that you have a few pieces of false and harmful information that's sort of built into your worldview, because we all do. But those are, you hardly ever think about those. They don't really impact what you do, how you treat people, how you feel. So for those pieces of information, it doesn't really matter that they're harmful. Whereas if there's an entire section of your worldview that's based on harmful information, maybe it's false information, or maybe it's even true information, it just makes up too big of a chunk of your worldview, then that's a different story. The second important principle here is that salience matters. And salience is basically the spotlight that you place on something. Like if you're thinking about what is your worldview about how people work, about upward mobility opportunities for yourself, about how you should live your life, all of that kind of stuff. What really matters is which types of facts and which types of information get the most attention in your constructed worldview. And one way I like to think about salience is when you're driving down the street, which businesses do you notice? Because you probably don't notice most businesses. And if you have a dog and that's an important part of your life, you notice the pet groomer way more than someone who doesn't have a dog. They're never going to even see that business, even if they drive by it regularly. And of course, parents experience this when they first have kids. Before they had kids, they had no idea how many daycares existed, but suddenly those daycares are visible to them. So that's just one way of thinking about salience. It's what's prominent in our minds as we think about the information sphere. So let me get into the 4 categories of potentially harmful information. The first category here is information that is harmful because it causes you to act in ways that are hurtful to you or other people. And for each of these 4 types, I'm going to look at both false and true information, because false information can be harmful, but so can true information. So the false version of this is fairly obvious. Like if you believe that arsenic prevents diabetes, if that's a salient belief to you, then you might consume arsenic. That's obviously going to be harmful. And I mean, that one's pretty straightforward. But what about true information? Can true information cause you to do harmful things? And of course, the answer is yes. The example I would give here would be, let's say you learn some true facts that taking vitamin A is helpful for certain bodily functions, that people who take A vitamins have shown to, have greater athleticism or, healthier bodies, whatever. You can probably find studies that might show that. However, if that piece of true information becomes really, really salient to you, where you're always thinking about how important A vitamins are and how much they do for your health, if that causes you to constantly take A vitamins, well, A vitamins can also be poisonous. So it could be that true piece of information causes you to engage in harmful acts based on its salience. And this is really one of the themes of this video, is it's not so much the piece of information that's harmful, it's the way it gets placed into your worldview. If that information about the positive effects of vitamin A gets way overemphasized and way blown up in your worldview, then it could cause you to engage in harmful behaviors. Now, my second category of harmful information is information that causes you to not do something that you should. So an example of false information here might be brushing your teeth causes your gums to rot. If you believe that piece of information, that's going to stop you from brushing your teeth, and stopping brushing your teeth, that's of course going to have a harmful negative effect on your health. So that's the false piece of information. But it could also be that there's true information that does the same thing. For example, if you learn that some people have to go to the hospital because they swallowed too much toothpaste accidentally when brushing your teeth, if that piece of true information, and by the way, I don't know if this information is true, but I'm just giving examples. If that's true, if occasionally someone swallows too much toothpaste and has to go to the hospital and get their stomach pumped, if you focus so much on those horror stories about people swallowing toothpaste and going to the hospital, if that becomes really big for you, that could stop you from brushing your teeth, which of course has a harmful effect. Now, the third type of harmful information is information that causes you to feel a certain way. And an example of a false piece of information that might do this would be your neighbor is always judging your looks and always gossiping about how bad you look every day. If you believe that false piece of information, of course, you might feel really bad about yourself, and especially if that piece of information takes up a lot of space, a lot of salience in your worldview. Similarly, if you believe falsely that everybody hates you, then that false piece of information is going to, of course, deeply affect how you feel, which, of course, it could be harmful. Now, the problem here is that true information can do the same thing. Like, let's say you actually do have a neighbor who's really gossipy and who looks down on people. That's sort of how she gets her kicks. And she does actually gossip about the way you look a lot. In that case, your information about that neighbor's gossip could potentially really negatively affect you. It could really negatively affect how you feel on a day-to-day basis. But once again, and this is the theme of this video, it can only negatively affect you if that piece of information gets too big in your worldview. If you learn of that information and you keep it in its place, you're like, you know what, I don't really care what my neighbor thinks. She's got her own issues. That's about her. It's not about me. And sort of keep that piece of information in its place, then it's not harmful. Now, the fourth category of harmful information is information that is harmful because it causes you to trust or distrust where you should not. So a false version of this might be your mother hates you and is constantly saying negative things about you. Your therapist violates rules of privacy all of the time. All of those are harmful potentially because they could cause you to mistrust where you should mistrust. Now, of course, you can have the reverse where maybe there is someone who's kind of dangerous and kind of manipulative, and if you falsely believe that they are trustworthy for some reason based on their past behavior, that false information could absolutely also harm you. And this is true with both people and institutions. Like with institutions, if you believe the medical system does more harm than good, or that police will never protect you if you call them and you're in a situation where you need police, if you believe those institutions are out to get you or whatnot, that could cause you to not utilize those institutions when you actually should. And so there's really four categories. There's people and institutions when it has to do with trust. And there's trusting when you shouldn't and not trusting when you should. Now, the problem here is that it's also easy to get true examples of true information that sort of violate all four of these categories. And that's because every single person has places where they fall short, places where they're not trustworthy, and other places where they are. And the same is true of institutions. Institutions all have failings and weaknesses and vulnerabilities, but institutions also sort of keep our lives running well, they protect us, they do a lot of good things for us. So for any person or institution, you can come up with examples of true facts that will cast doubt on their trustworthiness. And you can come up with true facts facts that will bolster their trustworthiness even where they're not. So once again, theme of this video, it's really about placing in context. Should you trust this person or institution? When should you trust them? When should you be weary? If you're going to be safe and live a great life, you need to have good ways of placing all facts about people and institutions in their place. Where do you trust and where do you not trust? So most pieces of information can be blown out of proportion to actually have harmful effects on your trust. I guess in addition to people and institutions, I should probably also add groups of people. When do you trust a person from a certain group? Which could be a professional group like dentist, or it could be a racial group, a religious group. If you're determining how you act around those people, how you treat them, then having pieces of information that are blown out of proportion could negatively affect your relationship with that group of people. Now, I think this is enough for one video, but I'd like to give a hint for how this relates to social media and also what we would need to do to fix a broken system in terms of determining salience in one's worldview. And so I think the two things we need both as a society and as individuals to navigate this are first, good ways of determining truth and falsehood generally, and then more importantly, good and accurate ways of building a worldview that places information appropriately in its salience to your worldview. Now, where I think we're falling short as a society right now, there's two things which really have to do with the two themes of this channel. The first is we need to figure out ways that both of those mechanisms, the truth determination of individual facts and the placement of individual facts in a bigger worldview, we need to make sure neither of those is corrupted by corporate interests or political interests. If either of those systems is distorted, then we could potentially be in trouble. The second one, of course, relates to social media. So social media, obviously, it is wrapped up in corporate interests. There's no doubt about that. But it also has algorithms that go about their thing, maximizing clicks on advertisements without paying attention to what is an appropriate way to channel people's attention, which ultimately is a way of determining the salience of different facts in our worldview. So in any case, I think this is really important. Really important. Honestly, this is more important than I even thought when I started recording this video.